Oh, God.
You dirty little liar.
I'm sorry, I can explain.
Explain how you forgot to invite us to your party?
Janice, I cannot stop this car. I have a curfew.
You know I couldn't invite you. I had to pretend to be plastic.
Buddy, you're not pretending anymore. You're plastic. Cold, shiny, hard plastic.
Anyway, we're going again. So just a little blip in the system. So let's try that again. Welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. I'm David, and this is my friend.
I am Aaron.
You didn't forget your name since the last time you said it, so that's a bonus. Hey, go follow us on social media at Growing Punk Pod. You'll find all of our stuff there, and hit us up on our website, growingpunkpod.com. It's been a while, man. It's been a few weeks since we sat down and recorded. We were joking back and forth, texting that this is we should just title this episode the most rescheduled podcast in history because we bumped it a number of times.
Yeah, that was just random things, and that's just life. So
it is, and
it's
we
all
even
good. It's finally here.
I was gonna say we even bumped it one last time because I went and got my flu shot yesterday, and you were like, "Hey, can we do it a different day?" And I was like, "Well, you wanted to do it in the afternoon." I'm like, "My kids are home because they're off school for the next few days. It might be crazy loud, whatever." But here we are trying it anyway because I got my flu shot and I was like, I'm feeling a little tired. I could probably go to bed relatively early. So here we are. It's the middle of the afternoon. It's not a first, but it's a first in a really long time for you and I because the first time we actually recorded, at least the first time, maybe a couple episodes we did was in the afternoon because you were visiting me here. And so we just did it at my work.
Well, even the very first, the one where I came on to do the Alkaline Trio album review, I feel like that one was during the day too. Like I took a few hours off of work, and that was, I think, the official first time that I was on, even before in person.
Was it? I'm trying to think.
So.
Maybe. I mean, we're looking way back to like before the show was Growing Up Punk. Like it was. We're talking about back when it was Music to My Peers, the original iteration of this podcast, and. Maybe I feel like I thought the first episode we did together was in person, but maybe not. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was. So was it the is this thing cursed? Is that what we talked about?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's possible that was done before because then we did one on Newfound Glory, and anyway, whatever. This is going way back. I'm currently getting distracted because before recording this I was watching a police chase, and so now I'm getting like text messages about it because I send it out. He must have the police chase I was watching must have concluded. I just got a text message that said the tackle, love it.
Oh, nice.
So if you're looking for a good way, an entertaining way to waste time, just sign up on Twitter for different police chase Twitter accounts, and then just turn your notifications on. It's a good time.
Man, that must be like that person that's getting chased. That must just be the ultimate like just burn. It's like, man, I'm on national TV,
right?
Getting tackled. The chase was fun, but now what's going to happen to me?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because they're all typically, I haven't seen a chase yet that's not in like LA County sort of thing. They're all in that sort of area. I think chases happen elsewhere, but they don't get televised. So, but in LA County, they're like, get this on the TV now.
Well, if there was a chase here, it would just be like down the highway for like 6 hours. And straight. It's like, man, there's no like, jumping over the meridian and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No.
We're now going through the field. We've been going through the field for 6 kilometers now.
Yeah. The runner has left Regina, and it's another couple of hours before they hit any other sort of center. So we'll get back to you in a little bit.
Turns out it's just a farm dog that got in the car and was sitting on the gas pedal.
Yeah, but the roads are straight enough, and the vehicle's alignment was on point enough that it just went straight down the highway. I love it.
Shoots the dog on national TV.
Yeah, let's get into talking about some new music before we get into our episode.
Let's do it.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks, so there's been a number of things that have come out. But what's something you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, I think I had mentioned this maybe even a few times with new songs, but I'll stick with the album now that it came out, and that was Let Me Roar by Northcote. So if you haven't heard of Northcote and you need some nice tunes to keep your soul warm this winter, then it's a good pick. I always like also, or slash, it very rarely happens, for me at least, where an album kind of lines up perfectly with the weather. Like some would say, pop punk is best in the summer, which it definitely can be, but I enjoy it, also in the winter when it's dreary as well. But I feel like this album for sure just kind of hit at the right time. I think when I first mentioned it, it was a super cold bike ride to work, and it was just good time for that. And, ever since, the more I listen to it, and as it gets colder, it almost just kind of settles in all the more. So that's cool.
Well, it's interesting that you put it that way, because I'm just on our website right now, growingpunkpod.com, because I wrote something. Oh, this is what I wrote about it. And you kind of touched on it. I said, Matt Good might have one of the most soothing voices in all of music, which is always confusing as a Canadian to talk about Matt Good and not talk
right.
about, this is the more, for me, for my money, the more enjoyable of the two Matt Goods. With each release, you can find comfort in what he's singing about, the characters and the stories he tells. Let Me Roar is no different. It also serves as a great record to accompany the upcoming colder months, which I thought, you touched on nicely there. That, yeah, it feels very much like it's a fall sort of record, winter sort of record. Where'd you go, man?
Sorry.
Oh, man. I was hoping
keep going.
I was hoping when you came back on that your shirt was going to be off.
Yeah, sorry about that.
This is the change number 1. Pop. No. But yeah, so it is very much, I love records like that too, where you can you put it on and it fits a season so well. There's a few that are like that. For me anyways, that if I'm going to listen to it 9 times out of 10, it's going to be in a specific season. And I think Northcote, this is the first Northcote record I've really gotten into since the self-titled one. I listened to, because he's got 2 full lengths, right?
No, it's got more than that, I think.
Under Northcote,
or maybe some are more EPs, or
yeah, I'm trying to
lost track at this point.
What good are you? I'd have to look it up. I feel like if he's got more than the 2 full lengths, then I'm unaware. But
I feel like this has got to be more than the third.
Well, I mean, this
length,
is an EP though, so.
Oh yeah, I guess because it's, what is it, 8 songs?
Yeah, he does though. He's got, that's right. I didn't get into Northcote until the 3rd full length though. So
okay.
Because there's Borrowed Chords, Tired Eyes, which I do remember listening to, Gather No Dust, which I remember a little bit, and then Northcote, the self-titled. That's like the multicolored kind of cover. That's the one that I absolutely fell in love with.
Okay.
Hope Is Made of Steel, which actually I remember that now. I didn't, and maybe it's because I didn't listen to that record as much, because when I saw Northcote, the couple times that I've seen him, he was touring that self-titled record.
Okay.
So I was way more into that. And then Hope Is Made of Steel came out. But so like Let Me Roar, I've probably listened to more times now than I've listened to Hope Is Made of Steel in total. Now, here's a question for you. This is something I have been like thinking a lot about lately, is what constitutes an EP versus an LP? Because according to Apple Music, Let Me Roar is a full length.
Yeah, and I don't remember hearing anything about it being an EP. So
The
I
only
don't know
reason-
if it's like time-wise or what.
Yeah, because the only reason I bring that up is it's only 8 tracks. And so I'm like, it's like this middle ground where I'm like, okay, but what is it? It's 8 tracks and about 30 minutes long. And 30 minutes for me is kind of like that like threshold of going, okay, is this an EP or a full length? Because technically, this is the funny thing. Okay, so Let Me Roar. And now this is basing everything off of Apple Music, which that's not the be all end all by any means. But Let Me Roar, they can by Northcote, they consider a full length. Now, if I go over here, keeping it kind of a secret for a second here, and we look that up, and then we go down here, and I scroll down, and maybe they do consider it a full length on here too. Oh yeah, they do. I was just say, I thought Sum 41's Half Hour of Power they had listed as an EP. If you look it up online, it's listed as an EP, even though it's 11 songs and 26.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, but it comes in under 30 minutes. So I'm like, is that sort of the threshold here of what constitutes an EP? Is it's got to be 30 minutes or more? I don't know. Anyway, this is all kind of pointless stuff. However, not entirely pointless, because one of the records I did want to talk about, I consider a full length, even though it's 20 minutes long. And so that's I guess the debut record, the debut full length EP, even a single, if you wanted to look at it that way, from the band American
Yeah.
Female. This record And I know I shared this with you, and I think I attached to it a lot quicker than you did because it is all over the place. But I was about 4 or 5 songs in before I realized that I was 4 or 5 songs in. I was like, man,
Right.
this first song has a lot of twists and turns going on here. Turns out it's just a bunch of short songs. It's 22 songs in 20 minutes. So it's like they blow through those songs so quick, but it begs the question, it's 22 songs, but at 20 minutes, is it a full length or is it an EP?
Yeah.
Like time
Well,
wise.
I feel like a lot of it probably has to do now just with streaming and singles, so a set of, 8 songs is probably considered a full length now.
Right.
And I think just a lot of major releases just maybe aren't EPs anymore. Like, I don't know if that's more of a like underground music scene thing. Like I never hear of a Katy Perry EP or whatever.
Mhm.
So maybe it's just, the time and length and just the kind of state of music now. If it's a
Yeah.
certain gathering of songs that it's considered a full length.
Well, and the interesting thing for me is that one of the things that American Fail really reminds me of is the Decline by No Effects. Now, that's one song in 18 minutes. I just feel like American Fail, it's one 22-minute long song that they just broke up into 20 tracks so that you could be like, oh, I want to listen to this part, which is kind of smart if you ask me, instead of having to listen through, if you're like, oh, I really like this specific part of the Decline, but it's like 12 minutes in, so I've just got to either listen to that or try and find it.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah.
American Fail's like, we'll just break it up for you. But anyway, if you haven't listened to the self-titled album from American Fail, it's definitely worth a listen to. It was released on the day of the American election, and I don't think that was by mistake by any means. There were a couple records that came out that day, which is kind of like a throwback in a sense, because it was a Tuesday when music used to come out, was on Tuesdays,
Right.
and then it got moved to Fridays. So it's kind of a throwback in that sense, where it's like, oh, we're going to release new music on a Tuesday. But all of the albums that I listened to that came out that day were very much political albums, and they were out for a reason. So, which is kind of cool, kind of neat that some bands were doing that. But
I'm almost surprised there wasn't more that came out that day, especially with the type of election that it was.
Right.
I almost expected, like a Rise Against or,
Right.
I know the Anti-Flag recently released a deluxe version of the last one, so maybe that was kind of their idea. But
yeah, I think probably one of the songs that jumped out to me that was released on that, I think it was released on that day. Now I want to double check. I heard it that day. It was sent to me. So I do want to double check. Hold on. If I could type. Good thing. The band's called Doc Hammer anyways.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, which of course when you search up Doc Hammer, MC Hammer comes up. Are you gonna bring me Doc
It's a
Hammer?
side project.
Yeah, I should
MC's little son.
where are we? What is it? Apple Music recently updated and I hate it. I think this is what the song is called, because now I just want to find it to see. There we go. So it came out. Oh no, dang! This came out August 1st, but it was it was sent to me. It's a very fitting song because the song's called Terrorizer, and it's very, very political in its core. So but they're such. I mean, I remember they like contacted us on Instagram and they're like, hey, would you check out our single? I saw that you were tweeting or like posting about like punk and hardcore punk and stuff. I think you'll like our song. So I clicked on it, checked it out, and I was like, I was messaging the band as I was listening to the song, because I was like, this is actually really freaking good. It's just like raw hardcore punk to me. Like I don't even know how to describe it, but it's fantastic. And yeah, it has a mission. That's what I'll say. As a band, they have a mission. But let's get into speaking of bands with missions. Let's get into talking about what we're going to talk about that we've been putting off for weeks and weeks. It's really because we just wanted to see the results of the American election before we talked about this, right? That's let's get in. We're going to talk about strike. Yeah, not. We're going to talk about Strike Anywhere. So for me, I'll just jump in real quick because I brought up this band to cover. I was like, let's do an episode about Strike Anywhere. And it 100% came from my interview with Brian McTurnan, who of course is the producer on both of these records, because that was the first time I really can remember listening to Strike Anywhere, was kind of getting ready for that interview. I've been aware of the band forever, but hadn't really listened to them to my knowledge. Well, no, that's not true, because they released an EP earlier this year that I remember listening to. So that was really the first time I listened to them with any sort of focus, I guess you could say. But yeah, the Brian McTernan interview is kind of what turned me on to these two records. He produced both of them. So yeah, I thought we would do an episode on them. But why don't you share your kind of introduction to the band?
Yeah, well, just to touch on Brian's interview, it's always a cool thing when a producer says, this is one of my favorite bands in general, but also favorite bands to work with. So it's always, like, okay, I got to check out this band, because if you don't hear that a whole lot. Maybe it's just because producers don't, do interviews or whatever as much, but it's just cool hearing that, like, okay, this is one of his favorite bands he loves working with. And so there must be something to it, especially a guy like Brian that has such a history with this type of music. So yeah, I was first introduced to Strike Anywhere by my good friend Jess from Dauphin, who I've talked about a bunch of times. Like, he had discovered them on mp3.com. This is probably, I don't know, maybe 2000, 2001 maybe. And so, he would download kind of anything he could find then, to which, of course, he would share with me. And I loved everything I had heard from them, then and all the way up until now. And what's really cool is that Jess now lives in Toronto, and he's a photographer there. And for years he's done, he's taken photos of lots of huge artists and stuff, but also a lot of punk and hardcore stuff like Strike Anywhere. And so he actually did some pictures for them. So yeah, it's just cool that, we kind of discovered them at the same time, me and him. And then, 15 years later, or whatever it is, he's taken pictures of them and kind of has that relationship with them. So yeah, that's really cool. I do feel sad still that I never did get to see them live. They were never a band that I even remember hearing coming through our parts of Canada. Like, I don't even know if I ever heard of Strike Anywhere doing a Canadian tour. I'm sure they did, kind of.
I don't know.
Prime, but
Let's say I don't remember hearing about them coming, but I also wasn't really following them, right? So
yeah, well, they've been around for a long time, so I'm sure they came somewhere around here. But yeah, so I've got a kind of a bunch of other notes here on them. Their lyrics touch on issues such as police brutality, anti-capitalism, women's rights, animal rights, and globalization. According to the liner notes for their album Changes Sound, they support the vegetarian lifestyle, the living wage movement, and the fight against corporate globalization. And what's cool about them is they touch on these topics without feeling over the top. I'm not a super political guy, or really even necessarily connect really deeply with political punk, but for some reason, none of the above mentioned distracts or annoys me as I listen. It's it's enough that they get their point across and stand firm on their convictions, but they don't make you feel stupid for not believing the same thing they do, if that makes sense. It's not super abrasive. And over the course of their career, they've released albums on Jade Tree, Fat Records, Bridge 9, and most recently Pure Noise. So that's also a pretty vast kind of collection of labels to be on. To me, it's some of the catchiest kind of hardcore punk that's not, pop punk with choruses. They just know how to write awesome songs with the guitars and vocals blend really well together. I also absolutely love the guitar playing. They compose chord progressions that are busier than kind of typical punk, but not so much that it's distracting. To me, it's kind of uniquely them. And I always think that when I put that on, I'm always kind of taken back by, just kind of how much the guitar moves around, but it adds to the song. It's not, to be like technical punk or anything like that. So
yeah. No, that's fair. So let's get into that first record of theirs, Change is a Sound.
Yeah, so Change is a Sound is the debut album by Strike Anywhere, released in 2001. So that's kind of crazy. It's almost 20 years old. The album's lyrics explore themes such as women's rights, like I mentioned, police brutality. The song Refusal was also featured on the soundtrack to the skateboarding video game Tony Hawk's Underground. And as you mentioned, was produced by Brian McTernan.
Yeah, it's, my kind of initial takeaway from the record, from the band, really is, you mentioned this, just like a melodic hardcore band with a message, and you can't argue with it, because as you kind of said, they don't really, it's not like they're beating you over the head with it, or like you said, making you feel stupid or whatever, or less of a person for if you happen to disagree or aren't as passionate maybe about the things that
Yeah.
they're singing about. But the opening track, You're Fired, is kind of an interesting start because it kind of lurches with sort of like weird syncopation on the verses, or I don't know if weird syncopation is the right way to put it, but it's sort of just like, it's like, it reminds me of a farm tractor sort of starting up, right? Like where it's just like kind of getting going before opening up in the chorus. And then there's a long silent pause, which I had to double check to make sure it wasn't actually going from one song to the next before going into the breakdown. And it kind of gives you a bit of everything, I think, in that first track, which is, you know, kind of a nice way to kick off the record. I like records that do that, where you sort of get a taste for everything that's coming your way. I also like records that open with like songs that wouldn't fit anywhere else on the record except as an opener.
Right.
I'm thinking about Brain Pain by 4 Years Strong right now and how insane that
Yeah.
opener is. But yeah, let's, unless you had more kind of general notes on the record, we can get into some of these songs.
No, that's all I got. That's plenty.
So let's go into the first track we're going to talk about, Sunset on 32nd Street. I real quickly, no one would blame you if you thought this song was written this year, because it's a look at police brutality, which has obviously been, you know, front and center this year with everything going on in, not even just in the States, but in the world, because I mean, there were protests that were happening all over the world in regards to police brutality, specifically, you know, police brutality born out of or born into systemic racism that goes on really kind of everywhere, but obviously the epicenter of all of that was down in the States. It's kind of frustrating that this song is still just as relevant today as it was the day it was released almost 20 years ago. But at the same point, I can think about songs by, like, speaking of police brutality and racism kind of coming together, like looking at the song Killing in the Name by Rage Against the Machine, which was released far more than 20 years ago, is still just as relevant today as it was when it was released. But yeah, I like how it explodes out of a cannon for the first kind of like 3/4 of the song, but breaks down for the verse to a clean guitar, vocals soaked in effects and the drums before getting back kind of up to speed or whatever. My only real drawback or complaint about this song is it kind of gets a little long and repetitive towards the end. Like when it feels like it should be over, they come back on that chorus again, which I'm like, I don't know if it's necessary. But what are your thoughts on Sunset on 32nd Street?
Yeah, excuse me. The start of this song just immediately gets me excited. It takes me right back to when I first heard it. And I always love when songs do that. You know, I love when everything cuts out and Thomas just yells, "I'm not resisting you." Yeah. And everything just comes in super fast. Yeah, I mean, the song musically is pretty straightforward, but, you know, for me, doesn't get boring or tiring. Yeah, like I said, the bridge slows down enough to kind of give the song some dynamic and then goes back into that opening lyric with the same part. Now, I find with Strike Anywhere, and, you know, this isn't any surprise from what we just said, that so much of what they have to offer is in the form of lyrics and the passion and how they deliver those lyrics. Mm-hmm. And that's not to take away from the music, because I love the music and, you know, that's kind of the driving force. But, you know, I can often, with a band like this, I can sometimes struggle to kind of discern, you know, maybe not this one particular, but in general, kind of discern kind of what they're talking about or kind of how to engage with it. And so it's just a part of, like, for me, is like, okay, I'm just going to kind of take it in, you know, if it sounds good, then great. I don't need to like dive super deep into it. But yeah, there's a lot to take from this song. And, you know, it just talks about that battle, that opposition between the government, police, and the rest of society, and the injustice that happens, and that cry for change.
You know, it's interesting because you bring up just kind of deciding, okay, do I like this song or not, regardless of the politics behind the song. And it's just funny because over the past, you know, number of weeks for sure, just watching on social media as bands would post about voting, and some bands, like in particular, when I was watching the Wonder Years, their live stream that they did back right before Halloween, Dan Campbell said, "I'm not just going to encourage you to vote. Like, yes, you should go vote, but I'm going to tell you to vote for Joe Biden because of this," and then lays it out, right? And I find it interesting when you see some people react to that are just like, keep your politics out of music. Now, the one thing is, like, the Wonder Years aren't a super political band. Like, they'll touch on things in their songs, but they're not writing songs that are specific about politics or social, you know, justice or different things that are going on. Sure, they'll touch on it. But I always just kind of like have this strange look and response when people tell, bands or musicians to like keep their politics out of the music, especially like when those bands are punk rock and or blatantly political anyway. I'm like,
Right.
wait, like why would you tell a band, like when you think about a lot of kind of political movements that have happened over the past, let's say 60 years, a lot of it has had to do with music, or has been like there's been a soundtrack to it provided by artists and bands and stuff. So that's just often been a part of music, is politics. And so I just think it's funny when people are just like, oh, shut up about that. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear your music. Or like specifically when they'll go on to social media, like an artist will go on to social media and they'll talk about something political. And then, someone will comment and be like, just stick to the music. And I'm like, you do know, like you're telling Russ Rankin of Good Riddance to stick to the music when his band is purely a band that is very
Right.
much fueled by political and social justice. Why would you, like just as an example where I've seen it, why would that be a thing that you would think, oh, I got to tell this guy, I got to put him in his place, when that's literally what he does. Right?
Well, and what so many people don't understand is so many musicians want to be musicians because they have something to say,
Yeah,
right? I've heard it
100%.
before that if I don't have anything to say, I'm not going to write a song about it. I think that was Steve Kravac who mentioned that, where he's like, I write the lyrics first because if I don't have anything to say,
Yeah.
I'm not going to write a song.
Yeah,
And you can say that about anything, like keep, religion out of it or politics. It's like, well, that's why they're playing music, is because they want to share that, or,
Yeah, specifically Steve talked about, because you asked, where those songs came from, and for his album that he's got out now, and he talked about having a muse first, right? Like having something that's inspiring you to write.
Right.
So that's where, and 100%, I think that's like when I write music, not to compare myself with any of these kind of artists or anything like that who do it 1,000 times better than I do. But if I ever have a feeling to get a song out, it's because I've got something that I want to sing about, right? Whether that's dealing with some kind of tragedy or death in the family or whatever, or for myself, like children going through sickness, or if it's something happening in the world. Like there are things that 100% inspire you to write. And I just find if I'm just trying to write, like if I have a piece of music that comes to mind and I get that piece of music out, but I don't have a reason for it, it just kind of gets lost to the, to time sort of thing, right? Like, well, that was a neat little riff or whatever that I wrote, but it'll likely never get used for anything because I don't have an inspiration for it outside of a melody that's in my brain. And that's how I work. And so I can understand how, artists work based on that for sure. Like just going, I need a muse, or I need some kind of inspiration to drive those lyrics and those ideas. So want to move on to the next one, since we went down a major rabbit trail there. Let's talk about
next one is
Riot of Words. So
this is another great one. I love the middle of the road piece of this song. A lot of Strike Anywhere kind of has that, just that straight fast beat to it, and so I do like when they break that up a bit, but it still maintains the energy and the melody to it. My favorite part of this song is the end, where he kind of sings and essentially sums up the message of the whole song by saying, "Are you dead-eyed from the sight of no future, and broken-handed from working for a promise betrayed? We can disarm."
Mm-hmm.
I just love the way that song ends. It's so energetic and urgent, and brings the whole song together in that. And again, not I don't necessarily connect with that specifically, but I don't know, the song just kind of gets me, and it's like, man, I can relate, and maybe not some of the same ways as people, but still wanting to pursue things and not get kind of sucked into a system or just do something because someone's saying it or whatever.
I did, one of my notes was, I love how the song really opens up for the outro, where they're singing Disarm and then the woes that are going on in the background, sort of thing. Good. This song as a song drives me crazy, and this is not in a bad way, but the chorus reminds me so much of another song, and I cannot, like, it's one of those situations where I'm like, I know this melody from somewhere. Now, this could be one of two things. It could be that I know the melody from somewhere and I just can't get any of the lyrics into my head to be able to pinpoint where that melody is coming from, or I've heard this song somewhere along the lines, right? Like I've heard it on a compilation or somewhere, and so that melody is stuck with me. But listening to it in preparation for this. You keep disappearing, man.
Sorry, like, the low battery thing came on, so I was seeing why the charger wasn't.
Is it charging
Yeah,
now?
I think so. Yeah, this charger's
don't-
kind of busted. Sorry.
Hopefully don't die on me. But the melody of this song in the chorus specifically reminds me of something, whether it is this song and I heard it at some point and never was able to pinpoint or go back to it, or it reminds me of another song that I can't put my finger on. It also reminds me, it's very reminiscent of Rise Against. And this is one thing that I find interesting about this band, because for me at this time, because when did this record come out?
2001.
Yeah, so for sure at this time I was listening to a ton of Rise Against. I got really heavy into their first record, The Unraveling, and so there are parts on this that remind me of The Unraveling, and whether it's like the overall sound of production, or I mean they're obviously similar bands and style, and The Unraveling came out in 2001 as well. I want to double check that they were
Okay.
like, I don't know if
Similar.
that's I don't know if that's how I missed out on Strike Anywhere. You'd almost think that maybe that's a reason to also be into Strike Anywhere, but I was just 100%, into Good Riddance and Rise Against. And I mean, I guess I was getting my kind of more melodic hardcore punk already. The quota was filled type thing. And I remember seeing Strike Anywhere all over the place. You're going to die on us today, man.
Sorry, what? It says it's charging. What the crap is going on with this phone?
Well, hopefully you don't die. So it reminds me of Rise Against. It's not the last time this will happen or come up over the course of this episode. Video-wise on YouTube, if you're watching this, you're just going to see a whole lot of me because Aaron just keeps disappearing. So while you figure that out, why don't we move into the next song, which is My Design?
Yeah, this might be my favorite song on the album, which is fairly rare for a final song. I love the opening guitar riff on this and the progression throughout the verses with the harmonics in there. It's just a really cool progression. It's got a great chorus too, if you can kind of call them that. It's a bit different. They definitely don't do your traditional punk choruses, which I think is one thing that kind of stands out about them. After the chorus, the song comes to this great halt where the guitar and drums are just kind of ringing out and hitting these notes. And before it goes into this awesome bridge that's just super passionate, it ends by building up this song again to full capacity with Thomas yelling when it falls. And I love that part so much. It just feels like this huge release after he's tackled, the lyrics of this song and the rest of this album. Just such a great way to end it, I thought.
Yeah, it's my first note that I have on this is that it really reminds me of Rise Against again. But I think it's just kind of that sound. But as far as this song in particular, the bridge, I love how I wrote it down as menacing. The bridge sounds like it's coming to get you sort of thing as it builds towards, the outro of the song. And the outro to the song is fantastic. It's heavy, it's melodic. And as you mentioned, it kind of provides a great way to sort of wrap up the record. It is, I don't know. It concludes a journey, I think you could say, over the course of this record that they kind of take you on. And it's a very fitting way to do so. So why don't we, so that your phone doesn't die on us, why don't we jump into the next song, or not next song, next album? Unless, did you have something to say to wrap this album?
No, I was going to say I wrapped my cord differently, so hopefully it's actually charging.
No more dying. All right, so let's talk about the album Exit English.
Yeah, so this is the second album from Strike Anywhere, released in 2003. Also produced by Brian McTernan. This album sees the band blending more melody into their sound while maintaining the energy, aggression, and purpose that you would expect from Strike Anywhere.
Yeah, I love that they, on this record, introduced kind of some more melody. I feel maybe it's just me kind of looking for it, but it helps complete the sound. I think the opener, We Amplify, really sets up the start of the record with its mid-tempo build leading right into the song Blaze, which is also, I don't know what I think about that when bands kind of split an opener up a little bit. I'm like, I just want that to be one song, but it's two different songs, but they build into each other really well.
Right.
And again, much like with Changes of Sound, they kind of really jumpstart the record in a great way. So let's jump into the first song we're going to talk about, which would be Infrared. So
Infrared?
No, see, it's infrared, and this is what drives me crazy. On streaming services, it's actually titled Infrared, which is a typo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's the song is called, as far as I know, I looked this up, it's called Infrared, Infrared, not infrared. But
Okay. Well,
that does bug me. But
what I was
oh,
gonna
go
say,
ahead.
one other random note about this is there's a poster for this album can be seen in the film Mean Girls, so perfect for the political rager that Mean Girls was.
Say this again.
There was a poster for this album can be seen in the background of the movie Mean Girls, like
Oh, funny.
in one of the rooms or something. So I just had to include that because I was like, what a funny band for their
Yeah.
whatever production person to be like, let's put a Strike Anywhere poster in this teenage girls room.
Right. So just to confirm, I looked the album up on Strike Anywhere's Bandcamp, and the correct title is Infrared.
Okay, there we
Much,
go.
much like with well, when we were talking to Roger of No Motive, how there's like just like mistitled songs on streaming services. I'm like, I wish someone would actually go about and fix those things, right? Like that's one thing with No Motive, they're legit just song titles mixed up between songs, whereas this is just a typo that I'm like, can you please fix that? But anyway, here we are. I love the opening guitar riff of this song, and the chorus of the song reminds me a fair bit of actually Hot Water Music, but on speed
Yeah.
is what my note was. Like, because Hot Water Music, as much as I love them, they're never really like a fast band, right? Like, they're a nice like change of tempo sort of thing, whereas this is faster than anything I can remember Hot Water Music doing. But it reminds me, has that feel.
Yeah.
And the vocals on this song are just so good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what were your thoughts on Infrared and Fared?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I also love that guitar riff, super catchy and melodic. I love how they blend melody into into their music. Like, you wouldn't really think of them necessarily as, a melodic type of band, but they have just enough kind of harmonies, in the singing and melody kind of in the vocal lines and guitar that, I don't know, it just makes this band stand out.
Yeah.
Um,
It helps
Yeah, and-
open up their sound for sure, just when they kind of introduce those melodic bits.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just enough that when it happens, it's like, oh, okay, like this song stands out because of this line. Like, it's not all the time, they're not constantly harmonizing, or like we said, they don't have a bunch of poppy choruses or whatever, but I don't know, it just seems like they know when to add it where it adds to the song instead of just doing it, to be more mainstream or popular or whatever.
Right. I'd agree. 100%. So let's move on then to the next song, which is To the World. What are your thoughts on To the World?
The standout part of this song is the repeated chorus. So they do sometimes kind of have those choruses, where it's that I pledge allegiance to the world, nothing more, nothing less than my humanity, and it kind of goes. And that part, I can remember listening to that too. And when I first heard it, I probably had no idea what that even meant. I just liked the kind of the way he sang it.
Yeah.
And that's, at the end of the song, it just revs right up and just kind of melts your face. It's such an anthemic rager.
Yeah. That's, again, it was the same drawback I had on, what song was that? Sunset on 32nd Street from Changes of Sound, is that it does get a little too repetitive. I feel like they do that from time to time, though, where like they bring the end of the song around. I'm like, I feel like you could have ended it, 30 seconds earlier or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead of me going like, oh, we're still singing this again. And another kind of tie to Sunset on 32nd Street with this song is that they sing about police brutality again, although there's kind of a change, I think, from what they're singing here to sort of where we are now, because the line says another heartbeat lost, another police murder buried in the public eyes on the back page. Like, well, it's no longer on the back page. Like, those are making like headline news now, but and police brutality has been very much on the front pages these days. I do like the message behind the song, kind of if one person is held down and changed, treated as less than humans, we all need to do something about it, and it's and like that, like I think with the whole I pledge allegiance to the world line, obviously it's a take on I pledge allegiance to the flag, yada, 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 right? And just saying like, no, life isn't about, our great and glorious country that we live in that's so much better than all these other countries. Life is about being humans and being humans together. And if a brother falls down, you help that brother back up, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, just kind of like standing up for everyone. And in that sense, with the repetition at the end of the song, while, you know, kind of just like listening to it as a song, sort of like in the background or whatever, it may get a little repetitive. I think if you're like, when you pay attention and listen to the messages of the song, there's a repetition for a reason. I think it's to really like drive that point home, which it does. I think it does a really good job of. So,
yeah, well, especially that end when it has that breakdown part where he's yelling that, like, I love that part of the album. Kind of builds up and kind of gets a little bit heavy, and I don't know, I just love that part. Yeah, it does get a bit repetitive, but I still really enjoy this song.
Again, I think the repetition only kind of like plays a part if the song is just sort of playing, right? Like if you're listening to the record, and I don't know if this is a thing that you do, but if I'm listening to a record, obviously I'm listening to it differently than if I'm just like have it on while I'm, you know, earlier today I was listening to Changes of Sound while I was trying to figure out why my dishwasher wasn't draining, right? So like it's just kind of on them. But if you're sitting down and listening to a record, going through the lyrics or what have you, like really kind of, I guess, absorbing it, that repetition I think plays a different role in my mind.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So let's move on to the last song we're going to talk about, which would be Modern Life.
Yeah, take it away.
Take it away. Do you not have notes on this?
Oh, I do.
Well, so this is, I only had a couple notes on it. It seems to be a song about all the things in this world that distract us from what's going on, but I still like TV. Was my takeaway. I still like watching TV. Again, as is the case, this is something I think Strike Anywhere really does well. It's the breakdowns. I really enjoy the breakdown on this song. And I just think, you know, like when it's a hardcore punk band versus say like more of a straight up hardcore band, if that makes sense, like, cause like, it's funny cause I've been diving so much into more like hardcore punk bands. And I'm like, well, how do we draw the line between differentiating, say like, you know, like a Hatebreed or more recently like a Knocked Loose sort of thing, like because that doesn't sound the same as like this, right?
Right.
And so the breakdowns, they all still have breakdowns. I feel like Strike Anywhere, like if I compare them to say like an H2O, for instance, right? Like I feel like they probably have maybe more in common with an H2O than obvious. Like Knocked Loose is so far, I think, on one side. But I feel like Strike Anywhere has more in common with an H2O than say like a Hatebreed or something like that. Strike Anywhere finds this interesting middle ground, I think, with their breakdowns. Their breakdowns, I think, still come off heavy, whereas like an H2O breakdown feels more like a halftime like bounce along sort of thing, right? Like,
yeah, that's fair.
Like basically the structure that Newfound Glory writes all of their choruses on is like an H2O breakdown, right? Like, we're just like, I mean, you can hardcore dance to it, obviously, but like it just feels more like a pogo type feel. Whereas like Strike Anywhere, I feel like they're not as heavy as, you know, those more like beat down bands or whatever, but I just feel like they have a bit more of a heavy tendency to their breakdowns, which is kind of a nice fit and a bit of a nice change. And maybe that's what separates them. I've compared them a fair bit this episode to Rise Against, and maybe that's what separates them from Rise Against, because I don't really recall Rise Against having much in the way of breakdowns. They might have like halftime verses or sorry, halftime bridges, but like nothing that constitutes really a breakdown for me, like consistently anyways. But
yeah,
it's got that going on. But what are your thoughts on Modern Life?
Yeah, one of the things I love about Strike Anywhere is when they match kind of intense lyrics with melody. And I think they do that really well in this song. You know, it's just really cool to have this really melodic part, but with this really kind of in-your-face call to action lyrics. And that really stood out in this song to me. It's an intense song, but again, it has that melody. It mixes it really well.
Yeah. It's interesting because like kind of wrapping up these two records, I'm looking at my notes that I wrote here for when we were originally going to record this episode, and I think they kind of changed a little bit. I'll read you the notes that I have written here. That was kind of to conclude these two records. It says, I can see why people love this band, but it lacks something overall for me. Every song feels very similar to the last. They go fast, they get angry, they break down, they go fast again. Obviously, this isn't a Strike Anywhere problem on their own, but it does get a little tiring. And then my next note was, in the end, I prefer Exit English as it seems to have a little more melody and variation, although not a ton. I feel like maybe that's changed a little bit I think I might actually prefer, at this point anyway, changes of sound
Oh wow.
between the two records. And maybe again, like I think my overall takeaway from these two records is that I can see why people love this band, but some of it feels like, maybe it's you kind of had to be there, like discovering them as you were discovering these other bands at the same time, which is often the case with a lot of music that falls under,
Yeah.
whether it's punk rock or hardcore or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of you sort of had to be there and gather that energy, or spend more time with it. And so I think that's what it really boils down to for me is like, I think I need to spend more time with these two records specifically, because I complain about some of the things like, oh, the repetition gets to be a little much, but I feel like it's a case of sitting down and really appreciating that they're not being repetitious because they want to drive that chorus home, like thinking back to this is the second time it's come up this episode, but like your interview with Steve Kravac, he talked about, like with Rancid specifically, why they became such a big band is because Tim Armstrong would just like hit you with that chorus over your head over and over again so that it's stuck in your head type thing, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the case here at all. I don't think they're trying to be repetitious so that it gets stuck in your head. I mean, maybe that's a byproduct that you can't argue with, but I think they're being repetitious because they have a message and they're like, we want you to get this message. And so on first kind of or second or third listens, whatever, sitting down with these records as kind of like A, time has passed on, and B, sort of like an outsider in the sense that, I'm not a huge fan of this band. Like that comes off sounding like, oh, these guys are very mediocre. That's not what I'm saying at all. But like I didn't grow up on this band or what have you. And so I'm kind of like having to dive into it 20 years almost down the road and go, okay, where do I sit? I'm not the same person, obviously, that I was when I was falling in love with those early Rise Against records, for instance. Right. So I'm like, to like bring myself back to that is a little more difficult, I think. But at the same point, I can see these records over time, like growing and sticking with me. And it actually makes me want to go back and revisit their EP that they released this year, knowing that we've got our lists coming up at the end of the year. I'm like, will that EP make a list? We'll have to see.
Yeah. Well, they have at least one. Well, there's Dead FM. They might even have another full length in there as well. So there's definitely some other material to check out. And yeah, I definitely feel like in you saying that, like grateful that, Jess found this band, back then and shared it with me, because it definitely did stand out, in 2001. I would have been a lot more influenced, by the kind of Christian punk side of things. And so with a band like Strike Anywhere, they definitely had a different message and something that, I wasn't as, attuned to, and, wouldn't have known a whole lot about those kind of, political things growing up in a small town. And so I think that's why it just kind of stood out, musically, but also lyrically. Even if I didn't necessarily connect with it super personally lyrically or really dive into it, I knew there was something different there. And I think that just kind of intrigued me enough to know that this band was different and special in its own way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And to kind of like follow up what you said there, they had Dead FM, which came out in 2006, and then Iron Front in 2009.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then finally Nightmares of the West, which came out earlier this year, which that's the one I was referring to, saying, oh, I got to go back and listen to that, because we are going to do a top 5 albums, but I think we're also going to do somewhere in there an EPs mentioned too. So I'm like, oh, I got to go, because there's a ton of pretty decent EPs that came out this year. So, but yeah, in the end, like I said, I think what I'm taking away from this is it's a band that I want to spend more time with. Not a band that I'm coming out of going, I don't get it, or I do get it, but it doesn't do anything for me. It's a band that I go, yeah, okay, I can see why people fell in love. I need to spend more time, kind of listening to this band. So we'll see where that goes. It's now, kind of in the library and something that I'll listen to. So, so that's exciting. That's awesome. I love when stuff like that happens. So
yeah, and I think a part of that is the live thing too, which I mean, I don't think they're playing any more shows anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, from what I heard, they were an awesome live band. And so I think that would definitely play into, especially if you had seen them, when these albums came out or when they were touring full time.
Yeah.
I think that could have kind of helped play a part in that.
so Thomas was actually on the Washed Up Emo podcast, which is where these posters came from or whatever. But he was talking about, they spoke briefly about the new record. It was a really good interview, and it turned into mostly Thomas talking about, you know, kind of growing up in the scene that he grew up in. And, you know, like the whole DIY putting shows on, like for a while he put shows on in a barn, which I think is pretty fantastic. I want to put shows on in a barn. But anyway, he was talking about, you know, because this new record, I think when the interview happened, it had just come out or it was coming out or whatever. But yeah, he was like, oh, it's going to be so cathartic when we finally get to play in front of people these songs or whatever. So,
yeah,
you know, who knows?
okay,
Who knows
yeah,
when that
maybe we
happens?
will.
Yeah, who knows? Right now it's, you know, you could play them on live streams, which is, I guess, fine, but
Not quite as cathartic.
not quite, because yeah, you don't have that give and take with the crowd. I love live streams. I've, you know, so there've been some really good ones that have sounded great and have had. It's funny because so I watched the MXPX one, obviously, which I know you did as well, and then the Wonder Years one I watched, and I saw parts of the Newfound Glory one, and I was like, man, the Newfound Glory live stream really didn't sound good like compared to, you know, like some of these other ones where I'm like, oh, like MXPX sounded great, and the Wonder Years sounded fantastic. Anyway, kind of going off a little bit. We're going to wrap this up. So go follow us on our social media at Growing Punk Pod, Instagram and Twitter. You'll find our personal social medias linked there as well. And then head to our website, growingpunkpod.com. We've got reviews. We've got different lists that are going on there. You also find the episodes up there as well. And you'll find a link to our merch store. You can grab yourself some t-shirts, which I actually just checked the other day. I'm like, oh, there's people actually ordering t-shirts. So that's pretty cool. So if you've ordered a t-shirt, and you're hearing
Thank
this,
you.
share it with us at Growing Punk Pod on one of our social medias so we can give you a shout out. And and wherever you're listening to this, whether it's on YouTube, make sure you like it and subscribe, all that kind of stuff, or if it's on your favorite podcast app, because you can be found, we can be found anywhere. Make sure you subscribe, you rate, your review, tell all your friends, that kind of stuff, because we want to help the show grow. So with that, that'll do it. So bye-bye.
See ya.
Did you have an awesome time? Did you drink awesome shooters and listen to awesome music and then just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness?